Hey there, welcome to episode 10. We're already at 10 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. Episode 10 already. Crazy. I'm your host, as usual, Dan Hugo. I'm solo once again. This audio program is not necessarily guest-oriented, although I'd like to have something like guest conversations or whatnot. We'll see. Today, I'm recording this on the midday, it's just afternoon, on the 16th of January, 2024. Last week was the Consumer Electronics Show, preferably known by them as CES. And so this week, kind of phoning it in a little bit. This is a classic story. I tell it now and then. I mean, it is part of my history. And so I will speak today about my tour at Mickey D's. Good times. Everyone should work in fast food. I think you should do it at least once, possibly at most once. But I believe that it's an important experience, which I will get into, of course, in the course of today's episode. First things first, the links. I am generally not pleased with how Spotify and some other platforms present the show notes, the description of a particular podcast. A lot of people post show notes. YouTube does an okay job. You can see everything. When people say it's in the description down below, that's what they mean. Now, obviously, you have eyeballs associated with that, so it's convenient. Spotify, among others, they're the 800-pound gorilla. Doesn't present rich text in a useful, pleasant, easily accessible way. So I apologize again for all that. But I do have some links in the show notes. Hopefully you can see them wherever you are consuming this podcast audio program. Let's run through them real quickly. Of course, the buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo link and the Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo link. Each of those are my shameless self-promotion. Buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo is where I stick links to all of my content, my audio programming. You can find this show, other shows, other projects, and so on. If you want to buy me a coffee, hey, why not? As I think I state there, and as I say all the time in these audio programs, the 4 that I produce each week as of right now, any monies that you care to drop in the tip jar, so to speak, the virtual tip jar. And it's ironic because today I will be speaking about tipping. The monies will go to coffee. I actually consume quite a bit of coffee. Who amongst us did not become a home barista during the pandemic times? So there you go. A couple of other links, more relevant perhaps. A longtime Nevada Burger King employee. You can watch the video. It's a TV news channel report. You can watch that. There is a link to his actual story, which I think is also their reporting, but you can look him up. His name is not Robert Paulson, Kevin Ford. Kevin Ford, Burger King for like 50 years. He was never late, a model employee. Burger King gave him the equivalent of a Whopper meal, I think, to celebrate his time working for them. And so there was a public outcry and a fundraising campaign. So the report that I've linked to here on the abc7.com website is about how Kevin has now purchased a home with the donated money. So good for him. It's a shame that it had to come to that, but good for him. Of course, here in Nevada, the new Florida. I also have a link to, I don't necessarily agree with Adam Carolla very often. And I could not find the original when I first heard him say this. Now, Adam Carolla is well known for his history of construction work. He will go on at length about framing and all kinds of carpentry. I think he's stuck mostly to carpentry, but woodworking in general. Adam Carolla, also famous for Love Lines, which is where I first encountered him when he took over for The Poor Man with Dr. Drew Pinsky. But the thing he had said, the quote that rang true, one of those, was out of context. I don't remember why he was talking about this, although it was probably very similar to the clip I have included, which is a YouTube clip with him and Mark Garagos talking about minimum wage increases. But at the time, whenever it was, he said minimum wage is a minimum. It should not be the goal. And I really took that to heart. I think he says a lot of things that I do not agree with. But that one, I was like, you know what? That is a good way to look at it. That you shouldn't aim for minimum wage. But I'll speak about that more through the course of this program. The food theorist, Matt Pat, has announced he and Steph are stepping away from their 4 glorious theorist channels, taking a break from being in the public eye so much. Good for them. Really good content. He had a good food theorist episode 3 years ago on McDonald's and their real business model. They're in the real estate business, not so much in the food business. So 15-minute video, great, really informative, really nerdy, a lot of numbers. He does mention the McDonald's CFO who architected this real estate model, wherein McDonald's, as a real estate company, rents their properties to their franchisees and gets huge tax benefits and whatnot. That was Harry Sonneborn. So the Sonneborn model proved to be pretty lucrative for McDonald's. So I just linked to the Wikipedia page. You can go from there. I actually didn't know how to spell Sonneborn when he was speaking about it in the video. So Matt Pat goes into this and the origins of the real estate model and how the tax system and being in the restaurant business, which is very low margin, being in the real estate business, which is not quite as low margin, has made McDonald's and other companies just as successful, I guess, as McDonald's. And they've come a long way, not on the dollar menu. So interesting times. And so the story, my tour at Mickey D's. Food service in general. I was working in our family restaurant when I was 10. I was bussing tables. I knew how to do cash handling, ring things up on a classic NCR mechanical cash register. No readout on the change, so I had to know how to count back change. Opening and closing a restaurant. I used to go in the morning with my dad on his motorcycle in the freezing Arizona pre-sunrise winter cold. That was fun. And we would get in there, open the place up. I would do my thing for our breakfast, occasionally doing the cash register, cash handling, talking to people, interacting with them as though I were slightly older than 10, but I was indeed 10 years old, and then close the place, get out. Good times. I worked at Fuddruckers in addition to McDonald's when I was in high school. And then through the years, I've worked in various capacities in food service, events, more like I've done some charity events. So you kind of work for free, and then the money made, even the tip jar, we actually, all the tips went also to the charities and so on. So good use of the job skills I developed in my time at Mickey D's. And of course, my time on food trucks. I did work on 7 food trucks in the Bay Area as part of my development of our owners association back then. So you learn by doing. So I've worked on 7 different food trucks. More. I have often said to food truck owners when they say, you don't own a food truck? And I said, yes, but I've worked on 7. How many have you worked on? And they can often say 1. So interesting. Anytime you have an event where the people attending, people who might attend, they will always ask, is there free food? Not always, but more often than I would like, are you here for the food or are you here for the event? So you're in this mix. You are responsible, whether you like it or not, for providing some sort of victuals for these people who only want more from you. I think this is something you learn from being in food service in high school at a fast food restaurant, is that the customer may always be right, but is not necessarily your friend. Something to think about. My time at McDonald's, I was underage. I was below 16 when a friend of mine at Sunny Slope High School, I believe it was John Romberg. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by saying his name. He was a close friend during my time in high school. He took a job. We used to ride the bus, same bus together, actually. We would wait outside the front of the school at the bus stop across the street. And we got to talking, and at some point he said, "Hey, the McDonald's is hiring. I just got a job there inside the Metro Center Mall." And they were always hiring, not a big surprise. But he was actually 6 months, like slightly older than me. I think I got the job and I was maybe 15, and I didn't have my learner's permit yet. So I was less than 15 years, 7 months old for driving. He was slightly older, so I think he was actually 16. Why is this important? I went to the place. I said, "John sent me." And they said, "Oh, you're a friend of ours." And there I was. Friend of a friend referrals, got the job easily. Most people who worked there did. They really just needed the head count. They needed living bodies who could take basic direction. And that would cost eventually. So that over time, I'm sure the turnover rate at any fast food restaurant is what it is for a reason. So I started working in the lobby, which the casual McDonald's customer would say that's the place where we sit. And that's true. So my first days were cleaning trays, putting tray liners on, cleaning tables, emptying trash, and so on. These are the sorts of things that you can just point people and say, "Go there and do that." And they do it. There's really no training. There's no cash to handle and so on. So when I started then to get behind the counter, do basic cash handling and cash register, taking orders, filling orders, that's where a little bit more training was involved, but it was pretty straightforward. I mentioned I was doing this when I was 10. So not a vast gap between where I was and where I needed to be to accomplish these tasks. I'm not selling that short, but I am saying I kind of did it already. So pretty straightforward. Now, when I had taken the job, I went in, talked to them, dropped some names. There were a lot of high school kids working at that location. It was inside the Metro Center Mall at the time, the largest mall in Phoenix. I believe it's been recently somewhat either torn down or repurposed. So it's vastly different from its former glory. But the Metro Center Mall was the place to be, almost like walking distance, like outside of the mall ring of parking lots and so on. Was Cortez High School. There was my high school, Sunny Slope. There were various other schools that were reasonably close. And of course, if you were over 16 and could drive, you could drive your heap of vehicle, whatever you managed to get at that age. And so there were a lot of 16, 17-year-old kids working there. The management was also very young. A couple of them were also in high school. There was no proof of age or right to work documentation to provide. I don't think that was actually true. I think they just didn't ask. They said, "How old are you?" And I said, 16. And they said, "Okay." However, sometime before I turned 16, there was a all call. "Hey, we're going to need to have a birth certificate, a copy of your birth certificate, and you need to provide proof of eligibility to work, the I-9. So you have to bring in, your stuff." And I remember looking at my fellow Sunny Slope classmate who was also underage, and I said, "Hey, Adam, we have to bring in our birth certificate and whatever." And he looked at me and said, "Yeah?" And I said, "We have to show that we're over 16. And his face, I remember to this day, he was a look of panic. Both of us were, what are we going to do? Turns out they were not bartenders, and so they did not properly check for the validity of the documents that we provided. I really just took my birth certificate and typed a 0 on a typewriter or a printer or something, and I cut out and pasted it over the 1 in my birth year, made a photocopy of that, handed it to them, and they said, "Thanks," and that was it. Piece of cake. I didn't have a driver's license yet, so they couldn't really ask for that, and so, yeah, good times. So yeah, and that when you were 16, they actually would allow you to work underage, but you could only work in the lobby. You could only be cleaning tables and whatnot. You could be 15, I think. But I wanted to work in the big leagues. I wanted to work in the grill area. I wanted to learn how to cook, which I did. And that was actually pretty fun. I would eventually go on to be a crew trainer. I only worked at McDonald's for like a year, and I would eventually become a crew trainer. I got a few raises. I always had good reviews. They would do the stopwatch and the little assessment forms every once in a while on different specific things. You had to know all the details of how to prepare the food and how to serve and how, what the times were, all that stuff. So pretty straightforward, although kind of a job skill. And if you're in a field where you sort of have to know how systems work, that was not a bad primer. So I used to be able to tell you how many pickles were in a giant pickle bucket, for example, for a useless example. So the upsides of working at McDonald's, or probably any fast food, I only worked at McDonald's of the big names, and I worked at Fuddruckers and the family restaurant, of course, which was a one-off. You learn how to interact with customers of all kinds, good and bad. And you deal with cash handling sometimes, not as true today. And counting back change, for example, which is still a thing, but one that almost no one understands nowadays. I have a fun story about Burger King. I purchased something. I canceled the order after 20 minutes because nothing was happening. So I had my receipt. I walked up. Let's say the total was like $11 and I had paid with a 20. So I received $9 back. I said, hey, I'm going to cancel my order. Here's my receipt. And the manager of all people looks at my receipt, says, you paid with a 20? And I said, I did. And she handed me a $20 bill and that was it. And I said, that's not how this works. And she just looked at me like, what do you mean? And I looked at the kid who it was his, I believe is his, till he would be responsible for this. Ultimately, end of the day, they count down the register and say, hey, you're short $9 or $11. So I said, hey, this is going to come up on your, this is not right. And he also had a blank stare at me. So I'm like, short $9, I think it was actually. Sorry. So yeah, they both looked at me like I was speaking another language and I said, okay. And I put the 20 in my pocket and I walked out and I've not been there since because first of all, that place was not great in general. Second, they're not really competent. And third, it's a scene of the crime sort of thing. But you should learn how to do this. You should learn how to interact with customers. And I was not being adversarial. I was just pointing this error out. I was actually trying to help. So you should understand how cash works and how money works and especially if I was trying to defraud them, clearly that would have been a happy hunting ground. The ineptitude, I guess, the lack of awareness of how cash works, how change counting, even if you're looking at the register and at the totals and the cash tendered and the change given and all that stuff, the numbers are right there. So handing me back the 20 plus the 9 that I got in change earlier. So something like that. Literally right now, I'm like, wait a minute, did I do that wrong again? I'm not going to do this here for you. But if you're in the habit of cash handling, you should know how this works. Forget about it if somebody says, oh, I have a penny. That will literally shut down restaurants today. So the take home, I'm gonna, by the way, you're sitting there right now and you're like, it should have been, and you can tell me that. You can come on the next episode and we'll talk about cash handling and change counting. It's a good habit and I'm not in it right now, but we should all be aware. We should all be aware of how cash works. Cash is still a thing, especially if you're out and about. Having a couple bucks on you is always convenient. You learn how to work on a team. Now, this I mentioned was a bunch of high school kids. We were all from different schools, so we did not know each other day to day. You meet people, you interact with them, you become a team. McDonald's, I'm sure it's like this in all fast food restaurants. Not as true with the independent restaurants, perhaps, but there's a whole process. There's manuals and documentation and workflow and temperatures and times and supplies and inventory practices and waste sheets if you throw something away and all that. So you're tracking. There's a workflow. There's often a communication protocol, which we did then. I don't know what it is today, but there would be the shot caller, the person that was managing the bin of foods that could sit there for up to 10 minutes or sometimes hours, depending on who was looking, would over the shoulder say something like, I need 12 10 to 1, 12 on 10 to 12 on 10 to 1, I think it was. And you'd say 12 on 10, thank you. Right. And then halfway on the turn, you turn the burgers over. So that was 1 minute in of the 2 minute cook time for the meat. You would say cheese on 12, and they would say on 12, cheese 6. And you say 6 on 12. Thank you. There you go. Cheese on 6 of 12. Pretty simple protocol, but you would actually be able to deliver ridiculous amounts of food with these simple communication protocol messages and acknowledgments, which were super useful. McDonald's in a mall, in the Metro Center Mall, I only worked there for one winter shopping season. It was pandemonium, absolute chaos. Yet, if you could just respond to the shot caller, you could deliver what they asked for. If you could manage a catastrophe, like if you had your 12 10-to-1s, your hamburgers and cheeseburgers, on the grill, there was a little ledge, so you'd put these stainless steel sheets that had a little ridge on them, so they would kind of wedge under, so there would be a little extension to the front of the grill, and you could move the patties onto the buns, which had already been dressed by your dress person if you had one, or by you. I'm kind of visualizing this workflow. Every once in a while, something bad would happen, and all of them would get knocked down to the ground or something. And I have to say, the place where I worked, they were pretty good about just throwing things away. Not a lot of chicanery with food. So that would happen, and you'd have to recover, and you have to deal with it. And so I have to say, the fast-paced world of McDonald's in a mall had that little extra bit of education, which I think was good. So working on a team, process, general function in real time, outside of a stagnant, sort of boring high school setting, these were great job skills. So we got people skills, we got job skills. And third, appreciating life behind the counter. When you work in food service, or in fast food especially, if you work in the service industry, you know this, of course. It's why service industry nights at some places are big tippers, the people that visit these places, because they know how it works. And unfortunately, our tipping economy is what it is. But when you know, and if you've ever worked in fast food or in the service industry in your early career, and then you move on to something else, when you visit a restaurant, a bar, a retail establishment, you kind of understand the joys of dealing with angry customers, upset customers, and so on. So if you recall back to those early times, you will recall the people skills that are life skills. So there's people skills like day to day, but there are life skills about how to interact with people when they are not meeting your expectations. You have to sort of say to yourself, okay, this person is not responsible for what is happening right now. They're the person I'm talking to, but they're not the person doing it. Things like this. So the upsides for my time at McDonald's were people skills, job skills, life skills. And I think that's generally true if the people working there are willing to take more than just their paycheck, their minimum wage, often paycheck. So personally, I think it was a good experience, which I'll touch on at the end. There were some downsides. There were a lot of incidents. Maybe I'll get into those. But the downside, first of all, you're dramatically underpaid. And minimum wage is a separate question, which we'll get into in a moment. Minimum wage is a motivator, but it is not the future. Hopefully it's not your future. The motivation is to not make minimum wage. They get a lot of value. We'll get into business models in a moment, but minimum wage should be aspirational. As in, I don't want to do this. I want to make more money. Be the owner. Now, be the landowner, actually. Working in food service can lead to injury, which it did for me several times. I'll give you two funny stories of several. One, McDonald's has a lot of meat on grills. And because McDonald's does a frying grill, the grill is a large stainless steel sheet with flame burners under it. So rather than flame broiling, as Burger King does, for example, the meat was seared onto the stainless steel grill. This is not uncommon. It's a pretty standard grill top. There was a lot of blades around. There were spatulas to raise the meat off the grill and turn it and then move it onto the buns. There was a grill scraper that was used to often the fat and whatever was left behind on the grill would build up, and you have to scrape it. So it was this rather menacing looking device, something out of a Saw movie, and or possibly or Seven, yeah, out of Seven. So the blade, it was probably about 4 to 6 inches wide. The spatulas were probably similar. They were at least the size of a 4-to-1 patty, a quarter pounder. And there were some other sharp things, but those are the two key items. And these two idiots that worked there decided they were going to have a competition to see who could, using a metal file, could sharpen these items so that they were super razor sharp. This was never the case. This was not in the documentation, the instructions, the guides. They took it upon themselves to make these as sharp as possible, then did not tell anyone. And so on that day, I believe 3 people went to the emergency room with deep gashes in their fingers, and there were other injuries, some problems. When you don't know that you're waving around razor blades, you might run into somebody and normally, well, oops, okay, maybe your apron would stop it or something, but they were cutting through everything, and so the fingers were injured. They were admonished. And then another one, now luckily I did not get injured, but I almost did. We were all injured that day. But another one happened. Now, there would be slippery surfaces. I one time slid almost under a large metal, like steel cart on which we were moving boxes of inventory items. So that did a number on my shins. That sucked. But my one of the best, I guess, worst, was I was cleaning the fryers. I was filtering the fryer grease through a filter machine, which was fine. You can reuse the fryer oil, grease. And at the time, by the way, French fries at McDonald's were fried in beef tallow. That's what gave them that beefy taste. This was one of the vegetable oil vats. I was going to drain the oil into the filter machine. In the vat fryer assembly, there is a ball valve that allows you to drain. There's some plumbing and a ball valve that prevents it from draining. You would move the ball valve by 90 degrees and the fryer grease would flow. So I was crouched down, my right knee was near this ball valve, and I went to move the ball valve and it had zero friction. So the ball valve just opened immediately, like fell open on its own, all 90 degrees. And that oil was slightly hotter than 90. It was, I believe it was like 425 or something. So some very hot vegetable oil shot immediately onto my right knee. And luckily we were not wearing polyester uniforms back then. We had these cotton blend gray pants. I'll use that term generously. So I pulled the pants away from my leg immediately, so the oil was not in direct contact with my knee, which was probably the thing that led to a mere 2nd-degree burn. It was probably the size of like a deck of cards, maybe. Not horrible. Still a problem. Right? That should not have happened. So I went home, injured, and ultimately it was fine. The injury was not bad enough that I had to go to the hospital, put a little ice on it, all good. I got off lucky. I know people would go to the hospital. I know there would be worse injuries, burns, especially a lot of burns. So yeah, it's dangerous work, not to mention the customers. So, and it's profoundly difficult, I think, to view working in a fast food restaurant as a career. Some people do it. We mentioned Kevin Ford. You can check out his story. There are people who work there their entire lives. I've known people who were working there for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. To me, that's a bit much. The Adam Carolla, minimum wage is a minimum. It's a reason to find something better to do. I think I kind of agree with that, which we'll get into. But it's honestly, I'm speaking for myself, not for everyone, but I think it's kind of a disappointment if that's it. Now, some people may find joy in the preparation of the food and the challenges, and I'm not speaking to that. I'm not trying to diminish that. But it is, if you have aspirations to build your own food business or any kind of creative or anything, I honestly think fast food itself it should be considered more of a learning permit, so to speak. Like that's where you should learn how a business functions, all those things I mentioned earlier about people, job, and life skills, workflows, processes, inventory management. There's a lot of stuff to learn that could be almost invaluable. If you want to open up your own restaurant, if you want to be in food service or anything that manufacturing, anything that involves interaction with people and process and flow and materials and all that. So it's difficult for me to view a fast food job as an actual career. So that's just me. You can hate me for saying that if you want. But let's talk about minimum wage. There is a recent, if you do listen to the Adam Carolla, the Carolla-Garagos discussion, which is brief, about minimum wage, they are talking about minimum wage increase in California. So this was 7 years ago, I believe it was. And, that has happened. So now minimum wage is, I don't even know if it happened back then, but there is a minimum wage increase that I believe has gone into effect. If not, it will be any day now, because you can find your own headlines about California, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, whatever. Everybody's now cutting back on the people they pay, their employees, and their maybe other services. Food delivery may suffer. If they employ the people, they can outsource that, etc. And if you look at that real estate video from Matt Pat, the food theorist, the numbers are what they are, right? So the McDonald's corporation is in the real estate business, and the supply chain and branding to a lesser extent. You're getting branded cups and menu items, and McDonald's as a corporation is the largest purchaser of any of their ingredients by far. Someday, if you want to dive into how the McRib works and their arbitrage on ingredients, it's kind of interesting. But the real estate business, McDonald's corporation is not really impacted by the minimum wage in California. Not directly. Now, indirectly, it puts their real estate holdings at risk because the franchisees and co-ops can't afford to pay people an elevated minimum wage with their zero margins. And again, you can listen to Matt Pat run down some of the numbers from 3 years ago. So it puts the McDonald's stores at risk, being able to maintain profitability and, more importantly, to pay their rent. McDonald's is a rent-seeking landlord. But it's an interesting discussion. And I have always wondered since then, and especially if you encounter, we call it paying people under the table, where you have employees who may or may not be legal to work, right? Remember I said I didn't have to provide any proof of anything when I took my job at McDonald's initially. I have known restaurant owners who look the other way, as they say. So if in order to maintain your business, you must pay people a bare minimum wage, and if there's so much contention over raising that minimum wage, and again, the minimum wage could be considered a motivation to not work for a minimum wage, which I do kind of agree with, then is that business model viable? If in order to remain in business, I must underpay people. More importantly, and this is the whole tipping problem, I must allow my customers to pay them part of their wage because I cannot get by paying people. That seems broken. And so in a rare occurrence that Adam Carolla agrees with me, he does point that out. And I wish I could find that original where he just states it flat out. It's called minimum wage because it's the minimum. It's not the goal. And it really should be motivation to do something else. I agree with that part. Now, do I agree that people should be allowed to be underpaid? For example, some states allow for a minimum wage specifically for gratuity jobs, front of house, etc. I'll get to that in a second, but it gets tricky if I'm allowed to pay you not enough to pay to live, the living wage. And there's always contention about that. But just from a Marxist perspective, should we as a people accept the fact that you doing your job to service my needs as a customer, you cannot afford to purchase the thing I just purchased, and that's a Walmart problem, for example? Is that right? Is that as long as I get what I need, I don't care about you? Is there a human element that seems missing there? I think that too. So the people working for minimum wage hopefully are not going to continue to work for minimum wage. When I did it, I think I was making $3.15 an hour, which was the minimum wage at the time. And I think I was making $3.95 an hour by the end of my tour of duty. Not a lot of money. At the time, it was fine. A gallon of regular gasoline for my Volkswagen Bug, which I eventually would be driving, was 79 cents. So cost of living, minimum wage, one has gone up, the other has not. This many years later, something to think about. But I sort of think they're profiting on the backs of their labor. Very anti-Karl Marx. I don't agree with Karl Marx on a lot of his contentions. That's a whole nother topic for another time. But it can be dramatically unfair. And I think people, it's sort of the iPhone problem as well. You're getting your iPhone at the price you're getting it because people in a faraway place are being dramatically underpaid for the value, right? The reason that I'm able to deliver this burger, this phone, some other thing is because the margins are so beneficial by paying the bare minimum to people far away. And, people jumping out of windows and off roofs and stuff, that's a problem, obviously. But when we've now reached, this is maybe my philosophical, maybe ideological view after my time many years later, is it worth it to get $1 hamburger that's really not great and have someone not be able to live in exchange for them handing me that hamburger? It's decidedly not humanistic, human-centric, humanist. So minimum wage tipping in the business models we were just talking about. McDonald's is a real estate company, as I mentioned. That MatPat video, really good. 15 minutes. Take some time, watch it. It's really mostly audio. There's some illustrative video, but mostly he just runs down some numbers and the history and how it works, all that. It's not really a restaurant, so that's left to the franchisees and co-op owners. Tipping in general is a way to make up for low pay. It's a broken system. The history of tipping is contentious, so we're not going to talk about that here. But it overly complicates the front and back of house concerning tip pooling and who's involved with the tip pooling and shift interchange. When somebody goes off their shift and the tip goes where, and there are some best practices, and people have gotten through that. But the bottom line is, you are handing the payment responsibility to the customers. There's all kinds of issues with that. The buyback practice, which you have experienced, I'm sure. Try tipping really well sometime and then see where some things aren't on the bill. It's called buyback. I personally think, and if your business model requires that you pay people the bare minimum so that you have the profits involved, or the resulting profits that you must involve in keeping your business alive, right? So if your business would go under for paying people, quote unquote, what they're worth, and that's always tricky to establish. But at the end of the day, if the employees cannot live, they are literally living to work and working to live at the same time, because there's really not much left. That's not funny. Then I think it's time to reconsider that. Personally, based on my vast experience this many years later, I think tips should go away. In general, I think tipping is it's a bribe for service, right? It opens up a bunch of problems. I think if you have a true team, your employees, the people working to make your business go, whether it's food service or whatever, should be involved in a commission or profit sharing arrangement so that the success of the company rolls back to them, because often it is their efforts that are the success of the company, whatever that company is. We have the technology to measure, hours worked, profitable hours, how much profit in a particular hour and how much of that should be dispersed to the employees. Now it's not a question of whether you're entitled to a tip pool in the front of the house, or if you are participating in buyback. If you do a buyback and you end up costing the company money, and by the way, that's profit sharing, not revenue sharing, right? So at the end of the day, if the company ends up getting shortchanged with buybacks or other questionable practices for the sake of solipsism, If you think like a team, everybody wins, and then everybody gets a piece of that profit sharing. I have to think somebody has been doing this somewhere. It works in commission sales. It works in other areas. It's something to think about. And, fun fact, California, because of the tech industry and the ridiculous amount of time that was spent working, if you were a junior engineer, for example, as I was at some point, and you work for a company and you end up putting in the 80 to 120 hours a week, or you don't even go home. I've done that. There was a window of time, and I want to say it was about 2002, 3, somewhere in there, for a couple of years, where the state of California said if you are an exempt employee, but you are working more than a certain number of hours, and if you are effectively making less than a particular dollar amount per hour, you're entitled to overtime. And that turned into a bit of an HR nightmare. I was working at a place where that would have been the case, but then you become one of those employees, and I didn't want to deal with it. It wasn't enough money to worry about. The take home, people that are part of a success of something should not have to hope that they can make ends meet when the thing that they are part of the success of is doing well. Rising tide lifts all boats. So I'm not a fan of tipping. The gratuity system, I think, is too much of a throwback, and it puts too much onus on the business customers. I think the business employees, the team, should work together and be a part of the business, not left to chance. I think it's broken. Anyway, so looking back, and I've kind of delved into some of the McDonald's things that affect, the injuries and whatnot. I made a lot of friends there. You engage with people from other schools, depending on where you work. My situation was fun. There was a lot of fun times. There was more than once when the manager, who was friendly with everyone, would say, I have to get the head count number down. Can you punch out and I'll give you free food? And of course, sure. Yeah, that's dumb. It's a dumb idea. But for the fun of it, we used to pull the grills out on Sundays and clean behind them. So I would work all kinds of extra hours. I would always take shifts from other people. So I'd be scheduled for 6 hours, and I would have 40 by the end of the day that the schedule came out. So it was a good time for me. Would I do it over? I think working in fast food or in the service industry in general is good, general, honest work for less than honest pay. And I think that's something that should be culturally addressed. I don't think raising minimum wage necessarily helps. I don't think tipping as a cultural component of our economy is healthy. I think if we enter the modern era, that we should have a better way to enable businesses that have employees that are sort of entry level or new to the business of interacting with people, preparing food, preparing drinks, whatever it is. I think passing the pay to the customer is problematic. And I think we have a lot to learn if we would stop trying to fix problems with regulation of pay and start trying to adjust our culture and expectations and what companies and employees should expect from each other. So that's a huge ask, and nobody's asking me, so it doesn't really matter. I think learning by doing, though, is critical. I think it's an important and valuable set of skills. Being in, if you're just in high school, if you're age 18-ish or 15 and a half, if you're in the age range where you haven't really picked a career, but you need to pay some bills, or you want to start learning how the world works, it can really be invaluable. And I think business takes far too much advantage of that. So I would like to see that change. Business models should work based on the business model, not on free labor or drastically underpaid labor. And there is a whole, you can search this out for yourself. There is a whole history of the cost of living increases over time and how minimum wage and pay in general has not kept up. So business seems to be doing okay. The workers, not so much. For myself, I learned a lot. At the time, I used to say that I liked the episodic nature of a job at McDonald's. That is, when you clock out, you're done. There is no project ongoing. Later in my career, of course, I would work at places where you work on the same thing every day in, day out, with the same group of people for months, years. And it's always there. And there are ongoing issues and revisions and continuing engineering, as they call it. So the early in my career path, in this introductory period, I learned that I rather enjoyed this episodic nature, although that's not how my career would go. It turns out that I do enjoy working on ongoing projects, so that was not the problem, but it was interesting that that's something I really valued for my time there. Clocking out meant leaving it behind, and that is not something that people do anymore anyway, so quite the opposite of what my future would be. I could do this all again if I was allowed to make a couple of changes about some of the characters I encountered and my interactions with them. I would probably, we used to go to drive-ins, get a bunch of high school kids together over the summer. You've all been working. You all smell like pickles and mustard. Not kidding. Yeah, let's go to the drive-ins. So go to a drive-in movie in Phoenix, Arizona. That's the best time to be out, is when the sun has been down for a few hours. So some of those social engagements were fun. There would be times that you learn how some of your colleagues interact with the system. We had the kinds of cash registers that would indicate the purchase price and the total change to return to the customer and so on. And somewhere along the way, people discovered that if you press two of the buttons at the same time, it would open the cash drawer without capturing the total as part of the running report total for the register. So there were people that could, I'm not saying this happened, but if they wanted to, there could have been charging of customer items. So you take their order. Now, the ordering was not tied. Today, this would not be as easily accomplished. The registers were completely standalone. They were only capturing money totals. They were not capturing orders to send to the kitchen. Today, you'll see a little screen or some sort of a display that shows incoming orders per register, the drive-through, etc. Not the case back then. So you could take an order, especially the standard orders, a Big Mac, large Coke, large fries, whatever the price was. You tell the customer the total. They are fine with it. They don't look at the total on the register. The register might say small fry. They only see a dollar amount. But the register reads something, and even if they did ask, it would be a simple matter of, oh, the display's broken. Okay. Because the total sounds right. And it was right, because it's the same total everybody has been saying every time they go there. Same amount. It's their normal order. You ring up the small fry, you put the money in the register. Later in the day, when you've accumulated, this is it's like card counting. You've accumulated $20. You say, oh, I have to go get change. You take the 20, you go around the corner, you put it in your pocket, you go back. Nobody knows, nobody's looking. It all seems normal. Was happening on the regular. And I can even say that on the sometimes occasions where the money was not removed, and so there's like there's an accumulation. I actually know this happened one time. There was a role called the backup. Like you'd get the food. You could be a runner, I guess. The person at the register is taking the orders, counting back change, and so on. The runner, the backup, is getting the food and bringing it to the tray, the bags, whatever. So at some point, this was an interesting anecdote, I suppose. The manager of the store came up behind myself and my the front person. I was the backup, and said, "Hey, you guys go on break." And we were like, "Oh." And I didn't know this was happening, but my colleague said, the register is $40 over. I didn't get a chance to take it out. And I said, oh, okay, interesting. And we were told later that a customer accused us of somehow taking money out of the register, which was sort of ironic, I suppose. And yeah, like I said, the register had accumulated $40, and I was surprised at this. And I said, okay, interesting. Even more surprising, the manager came back and said, no, you're fine. There was no money missing. So it was a rampant bonus program happening at that particular McDonald's. The interesting part was that because it was the mall and there was ridiculous amounts of customer traffic all the time from open to close. Nobody really paid attention to 5-10% losses. They were in the noise, I suppose, and that was a substantial amount of money. So this is another problem with the minimum wage conundrum, is that when you underpay people, the buyback program, the bonus program in this case, there were people that could take advantage of the many gaps in the system and make it work for them. And there you go. Nowadays, the shoplifting problems that you find in retail establishments, and I'm spacing on the word that they use, but it'll come to me. You probably have heard it, and the losses are really small compared to the operating of the business, the general revenue, cost of doing business, all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting. Would I do that over though? I would avoid all of that, but I believe it's probably hard to. You're going to encounter. I remember the day. I don't remember the people involved. It was 2 high school girls, and I said something about I found some change or something, and I walked up from the lobby side of the counter, and I said something about money, and they said, "Oh," and they just tapped a couple buttons. The drawer opened, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." And they said, "Oh yeah," and they kind of looked at each other like they knew what was going on. So I was just a naive 15-and-a-half-year-old at the time. Would I do some of those things over? No, I would change a few of those things, but I did learn a lot. So I would do it again. I would work at McDonald's, even if I couldn't change those things. The net outcomes were very educational. I think it's been valuable, even to this day, to have worked in a fast food establishment in the service industry. Like I said, I've worked in other places that were similar. The Fuddruckers experience was very interesting, but kind of knowing how to do it. I wouldn't turn my nose up at, hey, we need somebody to help out on the line here. Yeah, sure. Been there, done that. Can do it again. Not a problem. So I think it's a good experience. And of course, whenever I go to a restaurant or bar, anywhere, I am not here to cause you problems. You are underpaid. I know that. People will blame you for things that you have no control over. Where's my, and how many times did this happen to me? Where's my burger? It's been however long. And you're like, well, the people back there, you can see them. They're cooking it. I'm here talking to you. So you will receive blame for things that you're not responsible for. There's a lot of process that can break down simply because of the time it takes and the delays. And there's a lot of stuff. So some of that you will take with you, if you're smart, into your future. And you will say, hey, I didn't get my McDLT. And someone will say, what was that? Was that hot side hot, cool side cool thing? Did that really work? Not really. But you can say, hey, I didn't get my thing, whatever it was. And you can not freak out about it. You can say, hey, I've been there. I've worked at McDonald's. I know this happens. Just checking. And even that Burger King story I said earlier, I could have been very upset. Like, it's been 20 minutes. I'm not good. I just walked up to the counter and said, hey, you know what? It's been 20 minutes. I think I'm gonna bail. Can I just get a refund? And then when they gave me too much money, I said, hey, this is going to mess up your register. And so I tried. I didn't yell. I wasn't smarmy or snarky or anything because I've been in their shoes. Whatever. So if you learn these things early on, I think it's a lasting lesson for how to do certain things. You're working with people who are underpaid, underappreciated. You don't have to be a part of that. So that's my take home. So yeah, I would do it again. I'm glad I did it. It was an interesting time. Because of McDonald's, I had my super slick 1970 Volkswagen Bug that I could put gasoline in to get to work. How does that work? And I bought my first modem, which I've talked about already, my Mitsuba 1200. When the Hayes 2400 modems started coming out, the prices dropped and I was in. And all kinds of good times as a result of having a little bit of money in my pocket. We should all be so lucky as we were back then. That is where I will leave it today. Don't forget, speaking of a little money, very little, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. Not only could you buy me a coffee, which you are not obligated to do. I'm not asking for money so much as saying, if you want. But that is where I have links to my other shows. There's this, Quaggling Sand. There's FFS Talk. There is the Quaggling Sand Impresarios audio program about the entrepreneurial ecosystem of the greater Vegas area and beyond. And the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program from our Innovate for Vegas Foundation. It is about our innovation culture and various projects and civic volunteerism and so on. All 4 of those I produce each week. No advertising as yet. So coffee money goes for coffee. That's all I'm going to say. And on the heels of me saying that tipping is not a great idea. But in this case, it goes directly to me. I'm not being paid otherwise. So that's the end of that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying the podcast culture as it is. It's been a tumultuous many years of what the marketplace is and what listeners do and want. But these are fun, and I hope you enjoy my various productions and the productions of others. And I think it should be easier to find podcasts, but that is another time, another episode. Cheers.